Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about artificial intelligence in the year 2021, where we are now, where we're going. To discuss that, I'm joined by three major thought leaders in the world of AI. With me is Lisha Lee, Chief Operating Officer and founder at Rosebud AI. Lisha, hello to you.
Hi, nice to be here.
CEO, Chief Executive Officer.
Chief Executive Officer. Did I not say that? You are CEO, correct?
Yeah.
That means basically you run the company up there, Lisha.
Yes.
That's right.
Also with me is Rachel Romeliotis, Vice President of Content Strategy at O'Reilly Media. Rachel, hello to you. Good to have you with us today.
Happy to be here.
And Zed Inam, Chief Operating Officer at Cresta. Hello to you, Zed.
Thanks for the invitation, James.
Absolutely. I love your background there, Zed. It looks like you're definitely, it's almost a little Hollywood. You got that kind of blurry background, sort of the Boku effect. Very, very cool.
Thank you. Yeah. It's 2021, the future of AV.
Exactly. He's the most ready of us all.
Exactly. You cannot top Zed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we want to talk about AI, where we are now. I want to remind everyone, we welcome your questions. Everyone who's viewing and watching, we thank you so much for showing up. Please ask a question anytime. There's a Q&A button down there at the bottom of the screen. You know where it is because we've been stuck at home with Zoom all year, so I don't need to tell you where it is. But ask a question anytime. You don't need to wait until the end, and we'll try to get to it whenever we can. All right, so AI in the year 2021, it sounds kind of futuristic. Like even the date 2021 sounds a little sci-fi. We're talking about this very kind of futuristic technology, AI. It's like I think we're sort of at peak AI right now. Like everyone's like, it can do everything like from boil an egg to completely change your business. The question is, what is something in the view of the three of you? What is something that is really big right now in artificial intelligence? A key trend that is shaping what's happening with AI. People should really know about. Rachel, what would you point to? What's a really big thing happening in AI right now?
The biggest thing that we're seeing people wanting to learn about on our the O'Reilly Learning Platform is about getting your AI and machine learning software or product actually into production, and the slew of opportunities and issues that brings up. So ML Ops is by far and away the biggest trend that we're seeing.
So it's really, it's people who want to take this very futuristic idea and actually make it work. And I think companies are struggling with that. It's like, we know we need to get on board, but how do we do it? So you're seeing people really hungry for education about actual real world applications.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's great is that AI and ML products are actually starting to be here. Like you were saying, AI seems futuristic. I think more and more companies outside of the technology sector are starting to figure it out. And I think with that comes they're used to shipping out software and, integration and the operations piece of that. AI has some special fun times in it. You have to look for, model drift. You have to think about privacy and identity. You have to think, and I think we'll be talking about this later, but you have to think about bias. You have to, here's this black box doing stuff for you. What do you need to make sure people know?
Right. It is seen as a black box by many, to be sure. Alicia, what do you see if you point to like a really big thing that's happening right now that's shaping the development of artificial intelligence, sort of a trend or a macro trend? What would you point to?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree that the frameworks and maturing of frameworks to like deploy ML in production has really made it accessible not only to like a lot of startups trying things, but just even other more traditional enterprises adapting some of the benefits of recent research and tools. I'm obviously going to be a little bit biased on the side of like applying certain recent research. So like for what we do, a lot of it is like visual generation, and I think it's more so kind of hit in the media around like deep fakes and more dystopian use cases, but like
right.
Not just. I think what's interesting and exciting for founders in this space is that there's so much kind of like creative workflow that can be amplified with this tooling. So not only from just like the visuals, but we've probably seen a lot of the applications of GPT-3 where you're really translating a lot of like structured kind of like text to code or code to text or text to text type of I guess like formatted data, and that actually lends itself to like applications that don't require a lot of data to kind of like make useful tools. So for instance, like anything from copywriting, which we've seen a lot of, to even just like maybe something a little bit more whimsical, like creative story, kind of like prompting, and interactive game making.
You say that you're seeing AI drive those things, or Fuel become a platform for those things?
Yeah, it's making it really easy to generate those applications, because no longer do you need to have like a whole body of data for this, but you can just like maybe get better at kind of like structuring it around a, I guess it's, how should I say, it's like sort of like, just like software kind of has, the software stack has matured to make product making a lot more about thinking about the UI and UX. I think the ability of GPT-3 to like kind of create an application that's like somewhat mature and already is solving a specific problem, to make the product making around AI to think through much more about like the use case and UI UX rather than like maybe model training.
And what is the acronym that you're using in there? I'm not sure I know it. GP3.2, is that what it is? So remind me.
Yeah, GPT-3, what does that stand for? Do you remember, Zan?
I think general purpose transformer.
Oh, you're right. Yes, thank you. So OpenAI came out with it last year. Sorry?
So it's a general purpose transformer. Is that an AI platform? I'm not even sure what that is, honestly.
It's a model. It's a large transformer model. And basically it's kind of a language model that I guess you can prompt it. It's like a really good few-shot learner in some sense. So the applications we've been seeing, for instance, that are maybe trending on Twitter, were translating like natural language to like React code. And why it seems magical is like obviously because that seems like a out of like a very quick application. But what's really happening underneath the hood is it's really good at taking structured input-output examples and then being able to extrapolate from that and giving really good input-output examples just from it.
And would you?
I think it's a generative pre-trained transformer, I think. But
okay, thank you.
Don't take my word for it.
I know, I'm going to take your word for it because I clearly don't remember. Yeah.
So it's a solution that would require considerable expertise to use, or is it like the general staffer could use it?
Well, it's offered as an API. I mean, to a kind of closed beta right now, because I think they do think, this probably will segue into the ethics, but they think a little more carefully about like, okay, we don't know what all the ramifications of the model are, but as an API, then you don't actually have to be an expert to start using it. And so a lot of the applications we've been seeing around copywriting, for instance, are just like really quickly spun up using this API.
Okay. Zed, what do you see when you look in terms of like the whole marketplace of AI? What's a really big thing that's happening now that's going to be shaping AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Rachel and Leisha both had really great trends. I think both are spot on in terms of ML ops being a key thing happening in 2021, and then just would say like sort of the how wide and how creative the approaches of AI have been in terms of impact. Across natural language, across computer vision. Let me just turn off so I think that's been very impactful from a technology perspective. I think the two things that sort of are happening in the space in 2021, one is that AI has historically been something where it's really easy to get to 80%, to get to demoware, where it's like you can build an application and sort of get to 80% and it kind of works. Like you can build a self-driving car that drives in a parking lot and it looks really cool. But then as soon as you sort of put it out in the real world, it's like, oh, whoa, there's all kinds of random things that happen. So that's always been a sort of a failure mode for AI, which has been a problem. And so I think that's changing. I think we're increasingly seeing beyond sort of the applications in large scale advertising, digital advertising, we're seeing AI applications actually have big impact on a lot of different things beyond demoware, beyond sort of that sort of flashy demoware in production. So that's really cool. I think personally, that's something that's really inspiring to be able to see a technology sort of evolve and be useful to the world. I think the second thing that's really happening is basically people are increasingly, so you have this like gap between 80 to 100%, but people have historically viewed artificial intelligence as kind of the lazy way to view it, which I think a lot of, I would say, talking heads think about it as is like, oh, think about everything a human can do and sort of automate that. And that's what artificial intelligence can do. But I think that's a really, really lazy way to look at artificial intelligence. I think the sort of broad impact that AI will have, and it's happening now, is it fundamentally unlocks building blocks that weren't possible before. So before, where you could sort of you couldn't even do certain things in terms of from a technology perspective, AI makes entirely new capabilities possible that not just automate existing processes, but enable entirely new processes. And just like how, so the computer didn't just automate what we did before, now it became a building block, like a database became a building block to do many things. That's happening in artificial intelligence as well. And so some of the technologies Alicia was mentioning, those are building blocks fundamentally for many, many new capabilities and many, many new things. And I'm personally excited because I think it's historically, we've had a really lazy view of AI, and that's changing. And I think that sort of approach to building blocks is going to have a really big impact. Maybe not in the next year, but definitely in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, to be sure, automation, strictly speaking, is not even necessarily artificial intelligence. I mean, there was, car factories in the 1980s that were highly automated, and that wasn't
Exactly.
even AI. I mean, so it's like it's a pretty dumb use, or you could call it lazy use of AI, just to think in terms of automation.
Yeah, I mean, but there was a famous machine learning professor. I'm not going to name any names, but like, think of AI as anything a human can do in less than 1 second, and that's what AI can do for your business.
Yeah, right.
Which is, I just think it's a lazy view of AI, because you're sort of narrowing your scope to the exact processes of what a human can do in less than 1 second, which is just not the right way to think about it.
Right. It seems like one of the trends I see, actually somewhat surprised to see this getting really big, is the idea of ethics and more of a spotlight put on the ethical use of artificial intelligence. I mean, I think a lot of technologies, whether analytics, to be sure, cloud might have some, especially analytics, might have some focus on how they're used, but artificial intelligence, it seems like there's a growing focus, and there's the idea of like explainability in a loan. If a bank has an algorithm that drives its loan acceptance, can that bank really explain what the reasons are? There's the idea of deep fakes going on. So ethics is a real concern. I mean, where are we with AI and ethics? Rachel, what do you see these days?
So what we're seeing is that the good thing is that people are interested in talking about it. And I think what we're seeing is that people are interested beyond the group of people that for a long time have been interested in it.
Right.
And so, again, I think this is driven by what are the implications going to be to the business. So I think people are really starting to think about the incorporation of AI into business outcomes in any products they would use. I know from a more technical side of things, I know that, we all have bias and we're the ones programming the AI. So I'd love to hear what the other panelists have to say in terms of like, how do we start it off on the right foot?
Mm-hmm.
I think for us, we just want to make sure that it's something that stays in the conversation right in the middle, because it's really important, to your point, whether it's regulated systems, healthcare, finance, insurance, or just I don't know, more mundane things like, when it finds its way into like Target, you know what I mean? We want to make sure that.
Yes. You talk about the famous example of whether or not they could tell if a family member was pregnant or not. That one?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. For those who don't know, I guess Target figured out a series, and that might even be analytics straight down. I'm not even sure they used AI with that, but correct me if I'm wrong, but like Target figured out that, a number of variables put together meant someone in the household was probably pregnant. They began sending advertisements to that household, sometimes to the horror of the people who actually live there. Like, oh my God, someone who lives there is pregnant. Oh my God. So yeah, it's a little sort of an overreach, I guess, is in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even feel like we know. I mean, we've seen like some train wrecks, like you said, like that's a train wreck. I think there's more, got to be really careful. I think there's small things that we're not even seeing. Like that's like, oh my God, telling women they're pregnant and they're not. It's like mind-blowingly awful. But like, I think there's
a little bit, yeah.
Too. Right. I think there's just so many. It's going to be, as it seeps into our world, there's going to be just little things that compound. And so we have to keep an eye on it.
Alicia, what do you see in terms of AI and ethics? Do you think what's driving the big focus on it these days?
I think it'll be like difficult to take such like a very bird's eye view of it. I mean, I agree that obviously the conversation is important and people's awareness is important. I think as somebody who's trying to build something with, I mean, especially an area which I think is quite controversial. I mean, the way that that's usually talked about in terms of synthetic media is like deep fakes and political propaganda, and like obviously like as founders we're not trying to like ruin democracy. And so it's just like, I think Rachel's point about like focusing on like what is the business trying to achieve and how that's actually affecting the customers, that's like a more grounded view that, as at least somebody who's building this, that's what I try to ground myself with. So for instance, like in one of our products, we like you just have to kind of like just make some decisions basically. So in one of our products, we noticed that like because we can switch how a photo looks based on like a person's face, like people were kind of using it for porn. So like it was not at the intended use case, and so we just had to make a call that like, first of all, this product is being paid for, and so even if like porn is not a wrong use case in the general sense, but like for what we were doing, that's not what we wanted to use it for, and so we just kind of like had a filter for that kind of use case. I think you just have to kind of like figure that out one by one. It's very a hairy problem, ethics. So one thing I do believe is like, I am excited by the fact that any powerful technology has negative and positive use cases. Right. So I'm really driven by the constructive vision of like, I want to build something really cool with this, and I'll be very careful, but I'm not going to shy away from building just because there are ethical kind of like, hairiness around the problem.
So that sounds a little bit like move fast and break things, but maybe a lighter version of that, or not necessarily?
Yeah, well, maybe I would change that to like, know where you're going and then try your best to like actually not like A/B test my way to a problem, but like I'm going to create creative tooling to make it easy to tell stories. Now, like make sure I'm actually doing that. Right. Zed, what do you see in terms of AI and ethics? Are you surprised by the level of focus on AI and ethics these days?
I think Leisha's point is a good one. I think it's a good discussion around ethics. I think it's often easy, for example, the analogy would be for a food critic to sort of criticize a chef in terms of what is the food being created, but the creative energy to make and prepare a dish is by itself is all consuming. So when you're building something, just building something and bringing it to the world, hearing no's 100 times, sort of recruiting people, all these things take a lot of energy. And obviously you need to be thinking about the long-term future, but it requires sort of recognizing that it does take a lot of work to bring something new to the world. And then you also need to be thoughtful about the ethics of it. My view on the ethics of it is that I think fundamentally the discussion is missing something major, which is that I think the conversation focused on ethics, but we never actually agreed upon what the values are. So different parts of the world have different values. So I come from Pakistan, which has very different values from the United States. My co-founder is from China, very different values there in terms of his family. My family had very different values. So we sort of end up sort of getting over tactical battles over like whether this is ethical or not ethical, but we never sort of had that alignment on what are the values that we were looking to achieve. And I think in certain cases where things become like, I think, blown over on media, I sometimes feel like the sort of things that the two parties are missing are that the values are not aligned. And there's not sort of a clear sort of what are the values here that we're optimizing for. So I think that's one thing just that sort of comes to mind. Just so
I'm clear on that, if I can make myself clear, is that when you say value, you mean like cultural, societal values must be aligned for AI to be properly used? Am I hearing you right there?
Cultural, societal, family values. So for example, in my country, in China, it's actually okay for large organizations to have access to your data. Like culturally, that value is fine. Like privacy is not a highly held up value in the sense like your data is there, your data is out there. It's different in the United States. The United States has different individual based values. And so like that's a discussion that's sometimes missed tactically, I think, on sort of what we're sort of disagreeing or agreeing over. Yeah, and so I think that, but that's a hard thing to solve. Like it's really hard to figure out what are common values and what are sort of the common sort of, what are the things we're all sort of striving for. But in terms of AI ethics, that's the one thing I wish that we would have in the discussion is figuring out what are our values and how are we aligned there.
But of course, we never will have the same values. I mean, I wouldn't expect us to all to have the same values. Seems like there needs to be some kind of an absolute, regardless of one group's or one culture's values. Will that ever be totally aligned?
Well, I think that's the purpose of when people come together from a country or from a government, right? You're sort of deciding here's a set of values that we have as a country, and then subgroups within that have sub values. Religions will have different values, different folks have different values, but we can all agree upon a shared set of base values and then use that to sort of decide what we want to do. Yeah, it's hard. I don't have a solution to this. That's not the problem I'm solving, but it's just the one thing I noticed that's missing in the conversation. But if Alicia or Rachel have solutions or ideas, I'd love to hear. Be curious about everyone's thoughts.
Well, I think the really interesting point is, you know, AI is still in its infancy in many ways, and it's going to grow. I think we're probably in sort of an exponential growth curve now, which raises the question: will we be able to govern it? You know, we'll be able to really regulate AI. And I've heard some really optimistic people say to me, "Oh yeah, definitely the companies are going to be interested. Maybe the big governmental resources, but there's going to be enormously powerful market forces that will be in favor of using AI to its full aggressive extent, regardless of any other consumer protections. And they will, those forces will have deep, deep pockets, and whether or not they will really be able to be governed is arguable." Alicia, what is your sense? Will AI be regulated or governed in the years ahead?
I think that's predicated on government actually understanding what's even going on in tech. I mean, you know, a pretty obvious point, I suppose, but it's just, I think we're far from even regulating when we've seen some of these Senate hearings from like last year, years ago, where we're asking pretty basic questions of not even just AI, but just like, how does tech work? And I think, I don't know what the answer is to. I mean, obviously I'm not in public service for probably, you know, a reason, but I think maybe something from like, again, the builder and founder perspective, like I think things that we've kind of taken as our kind of code of ethics is like part of our job maybe is to educate, not to in building the product, but like where we can show where the tech is going and where the capabilities are, we make some attempt at like at least sharing that with the public. And so I think that's one step, but I mean, I'm not gonna be overly idealistic about that. I think there's a lot of, I mean, the fact that like most of the people in power don't know how this tech works is symptomatic of probably bigger problems with just how maybe like just how this kind of knowledge is disseminated. It is moving fast, but it's like, it doesn't just start with AI. It just starts with like, how does the internet work? How does like Facebook make money? Like these are questions that should be answered and senators should know that, but they don't. So
it's rather complicated when you think about it. I mean, how Facebook makes money is probably not that complicated, but what exactly AI is gets a little bit down in the weeds for some of those folks, I bet. But Rachel, what is your view? I mean, will AI be this ungoverned, unregulated monster in the years ahead, or will we have some safeguards to protect us, you know, from its power?
I think, unfortunately, Alicia's right on. And I think in the near term, it's going to be more about, which is going to have a lot of problems, companies sort of having their own AI governance strategies. What I could see happening, although I don't know if this will happen. Like, I'm just trying to think, if the government's not going to be able to do it, what is going to happen? You know, are there going to be industry-wide organizations that set something up, or is it going to be sort of like communities that will point out like, hey, you know, you're doing something wrong, or you're overreaching here? It's so no, I don't think it's going to be governed in the short term. And I think that's going to be a problem. I think it is going to be a problem, actually, because there are going to be like bad actors.
Indeed. Zed, have you weighed in on the AI being governed issue? What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to sort of the if you go back to the chef analogy, right? So like someone's sort of figuring out, innovating on a new dish for the first time. And you're sort of saying, hey, I want you to make a salmon risotto, but whoa, before you make that salmon risotto, you have to know that you can only use 50 grams of salmon, and you can only sort of use these chives, and you can only use this amount of butter. And careful, you don't overburn the salmon for more than 10 seconds. It's really hard in a creative process to build something from scratch and build a new technology and apply sort of regulation early on and understanding what is the impact of the technology. It's just a very different fundamental, I think, energy and fundamental process. And so I think that, look, the impact is huge, and we've seen that with social media. We've seen the impact that technology has in the world, and the rules of the game change. Like when social media was just a small network, small town hall, you had 1 million people maybe, then that's fine. But as soon as you have a 3 billion person town hall for the first time, the rules of the game change in terms of how we need to act and operate in those kinds of environments. And so the same thing will happen with AI, that the rules of the game will change. At some point, the technology will get very powerful, and that will change dramatically what we need to do. I would just say, proceed with caution. I think our fundamental progress as humans has sort of been that we innovate, that we push technology forward, and that's actually been a tide that lifts all boats. We've sort of been able to dramatically enhance productivity, impacts on poverty, impacts on sort of health, all because of advancements in technology. And I don't think we would have that progress if everything was regulated from day one. I think we just need to be careful. And I think we need to respect the creative process. And I think we just need to watch it carefully before we regulate.
And please go ahead, please.
They're just like riffing off of your point a little bit.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we're seeing, I mean, especially with the increase in remote work and like, you know, most things being very efficiently run and started on the cloud, like this is an opportunity for nation states really to compete on like who can more efficiently like learn and
right.
effectively learn and adapt to these things. I think regulation is definitely part of the picture, but also just like making use of talent on that level. I'm not talking about like, you know, I'm talking about just, you know, places like, and I'm not an expert on this, but you know, you hear that like Estonia is very kind of like digitally forward thinking, or like other countries are just trying to just better adapt to technology with like voting and things like that. And so I'm not saying all of these are like really well-run experiments or like necessarily successful yet, but I am excited about like having more players who are going to just like introduce more competition here and kind of maybe lead by example. And so hopefully that actually incites some dynamics for progress.
Oh, that wouldn't necessarily excite a dynamic for regulation. It sounds like it makes it more powerful, but not necessarily more regulated, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, they can maybe introduce regulation in ways that actually, you know, work or prove themselves to be very kind of like healthy for both progress and safety. And if we're kind of too big of a government to actually try things, then
I think Alicia might have frozen, which is
on the nation state level that can introduce better competition or competitive dynamics.
Gotcha.
And we're seeing it with COVID, right?
Looks like my internet froze a little bit. Rachel, are you there?
No, never mind. Yeah.
Deep in thought.
Yeah.
No, my internet froze for 1 second, which I guess, you know, speaking of advanced technologies, even the internet doesn't even work fabulously all the time, but I'm here. All right, to wrap things up, I think it'd be interesting to look into the future, look sort of our crystal ball. You know, what is a key trend, a key macro trend that you think will influence the development of artificial intelligence in the years ahead? Maybe, you know, the mid 2020s, the year 2030. What is, or maybe not that far. I mean, you know, what is going to really be driving AI looking ahead? Rachel, what do you say?
What we're really seeing right now, people have been talking about sort of automation on a few different levels and the impact that's going to have on work. I think we're starting to actually see that in practice. And people, you know, we're seeing AI powered testing on code. We're seeing observability of code bases, you know, that have been deployed. I think we're at the point where we're going to start to see roles shift as some processes are automated. And I'm actually really, and I do think that's going to be over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm interested to see how that changes. Like, what does that free us up to do? And does that help us, you know, with these things that maybe are a little bit opaque, right? So that's what we're looking at, both the like who's actually creating these pieces of software for automation, but then how are we incorporating them? And I think that's going to be sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back for like, you know, the average corporation. I think they're going to want to do it. They probably don't do it right the first time, but it's going to be something that is across the board.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of companies that have a lot of frustration with trying to implement AI. They've spent money on it, and for some of them, it's just kind of a complicated science project that they still see as a waste of money, but they need to get on board.
Yeah.
Is that what would you forecast? Some key trend that's going to really drive AI years from now?
I mean, I think it's a really exciting time in the field.
For sure.
I think the technology is going to change human productivity. I think it's going to 100x human productivity, and it's going to make things possible that just weren't possible before. And yes, there will be bumps along the way. And yes, there will be sort of things that don't work and early technologies that fizzle out. But I think fundamentally there's a set of principles there that really make a lot of sense. And I think the impact on the way we work is just going to have huge impact. The way we live, it's going to have huge impact. The only thing I wish is that we need more sort of people dedicated towards advancing that future. I think if you look at the United States right now, there's a lot of sort of energy dedicated, I think, to oftentimes I would say financial engineering or investing in stock markets, these kinds of things.
Right.
And I say, like, I think the biggest thing that we need is folks that are really sort of believe in something and really want to push an idea forward and build an idea to fruition. Because I think when those kinds of things happen, it accelerates the progress and accelerates our future. And just so much is possible in terms of the productivity enhancements we can have. And so, like, if anything, I would say is like the thing that's slowing us down is like less focus on sort of advancing the future, building things, and more focus on other sort of aspects I think are more so optimizations of these existing systems. And so that means young people, old people, everyone sort of learning AI, learning how to program, learning how to sort of build things, learning how to arrange their contact center operations to be more effective because there's a more efficient way to do it, learning how to sort of build a new sort of HR application based on sort of a principle of AI that streamlines the workflow. I mean, everyone can become a programmer in this kind of world. And I think that's the kind of energy we need in the country to sort of really advance it forward.
And certainly there's the idea of, low code platforms and low code solutions that are enabling that thing where, the citizen developer can actually be creating AI. So that's, I definitely see that trend coming. Alicia, what do you see? Some big macro trend in the years ahead that's going to really shape AI, maybe even surprise us all? What is your view on that?
Yeah, Rachel and Zed made some really good points. So I'll just maybe take it in an orthogonal direction.
Cool.
From the perspective. Yeah. Well, no, not orthogonal as in it disagrees. Just like covering a different part of the actual space.
Yeah.
I'm no surprise. I'm very into like the whole potential of visual and I guess content generation from things that's emerging out of GANs and all of these other techniques in deep learning. And so I think where that maybe merges with the macro trend is kind of like storytelling at the power of like maybe the individual or more kind of distributed away from like central media sources and the traditional Hollywood. I mean, this is a trend that's been long going, especially with like social platforms where individual influencers can obviously have access to very easy tools and a huge distributed, I guess, like a platform to distribute their ideas. And I think where I'm really excited, or what I'm really excited about, is like how does like these techniques from deep learning make that even easier, so that you can tell like very compelling, emotionally kind of, just like authentic things, but like using tools that make that 100x easier, but like cinematic quality. And so then everyone else is like in charge of their own kind of, storytelling. And so that, I mean, because ultimately we're still very sociological creatures and that's how we relate. And so I am excited about, I mean, all of this could be, used in very dystopian ways, but I'm excited about like using that in a way to like kind of democratize the ability to kind of communicate what's important to people. And so, yeah, I guess leaving it on that note.
That's interesting, the idea of the democratizing the technology. I mean, what form would that take in terms of allowing people to tell their own stories, perhaps in a social media platform or some other, broadcast platform? How exactly might that work specifically?
Yeah, I mean, like creating a good video is still, hard. I mean, a lot of it is like a video edit. How do you kind of have an arc of actual, I guess, like narrative? How do you create visuals that are engaging? But then there's also the idea behind the content. And so I think a lot of where these tools and the tech itself is going is, how do you make that easier in like, in the sense of like you have access to these kind of like paired of structured data of like content to output video. And so I think just like what I'm interested in is like, if you create that if you make that mapping way easier, then the people who have something to say, they will have an ability to create these kind of like videos and stories so that it engages more people and they have like an easier to, I guess, easier way to kind of like be heard. So,
Right. Neat. No, I definitely could see it happening for sure. It seems like it's almost inevitable at some level.
yeah.
At any rate, Leisha, Rachel, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. I definitely learned something. I'll send you the video link when it's all put together. It was a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
James.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Everyone, take care.